Thanks for joining us again, Cleo.
Very, very good to be back. I had to very quickly change clothes and change my backdrop so people would think we aren't just continuing the last conversation, but hopefully it'll work.
That's ridiculous. It's been at least like 2 or 3 weeks since we had you on.
Exactly.
But that was a great interview. I recommend everyone check it out. But we didn't get to talk about your other big area of expertise, which is the Pacific Island nations, and particularly China's interests there. I think a lot of Americans don't really think about the Pacific Island nations all that much, which is unfortunate because China sure is. And the latest thing we've seen is this security pact signed between China and the Solomon Islands. So why is that significant?
So what's worth noting is actually the U.S. Is a Pacific Island nation. So Guam is part of the U.S. U.S. territory, U.S. citizens. So is Marianas. There's American Samoa. This is not. Hawaii obviously is part of the U.S. and one of the biggest Pacific Islands. So it's first of all, as a starting point, I think getting that into your psychology is very helpful. The U.S. And its citizens are an integral part of the Pacific Islands and have fought and died alongside partners in the region. And we tend to, because most of the media and political structures of the U.S. are on the East Coast for historical reasons, I think there isn't as much awareness of how much of a Pacific country the U.S. is. And so
what you're saying is the Pacific has been part of America's territory since ancient times.
Yeah. So you can find McDonald's wrappers on the beaches of Saipan.
That's beautiful. That makes me feel so patriotic.
That's right. At least 150,000-year-old McDonald's wrappers. So it shows you how deep the relationship is. But yeah, so first of all, just before the conversation starts, kind of shift your whole mental map. About 10,000 miles to the west. And as Americans, this is part of you and you are part of it. And that's been a problem for expansionist Asian powers ever since the 19th century and beyond. So if you look at some of the countries that we're going to talk about, first they were colonized by Spain, and then Spain lost them to Germany, and Germany lost them to Japan, and then Japan lost them to the U.S. And so they know a lot about geopolitical upheaval, and the people of the countries are extremely knowledgeable about it. This is family history to them. But now it's in many cases they have these special relationships with the U.S. So they know an enormous amount about the warp and weft of geopolitics. And they have these ties to the U.S. and in some cases are U.S. citizens. So that's you're there. That's embedded. They know it. They feel it. And countries like Japan during World War II, if they want to be able to expand outside of their immediate sphere, they need to get through these other zones of engagement. So that would be, at that time, there's a lot of British and a lot of French, but now it's American. And this goes back to the first island chain stuff. So as you can see from this map, you've got the first island chain that goes down from Japan through Taiwan.
We don't have that kind of budget.
Through the Philippines. I'm doing it for you here. So this is China. And then you've got this chain of islands that goes off the coast. And to get the PLA Navy off the coast, it has to break out of those islands. So that's why they want to take Taiwan. And if they can do that, they can project power. But in order to be able to do that, they also need enough control in the Pacific Islands to cover that flank and ideally to leapfrog from there and project power from the Pacific Islands. So this is kind of the points of view. This is the points of view of China to understand why this region is actually imperative for them. If they're going to make the PLA Navy functional, they need control, operational control in the Pacific Islands. They need that aerial denial component needs to be across the board. So that's where you get this bump up against the Americans that are in the region and others that are in the region, Pacific Islanders, and China's expansionist policies. So when people kind of try to frame it as, oh, this is just China versus the US. This is China. This is an expansionist China trying to expand its sphere of influence in a way that is very different from the way that at least the US did it, and actually much more akin to the way European powers did it before.
Do you mean like kind of a colonial, oppressive domination of the region?
Yeah, and very much so, because you asked about the Solomon Islands. So there was this agreement that came out. I'm sorry about all the background. It's an area that we don't talk about enough. So a lot of little stepping stones need to be put in place as you build your logical argument, hopefully logical. So this agreement, which was leaked by very concerned people within the Solomon Islands system, is very similar actually to what you'd have seen from like a British Tonga treaty in the early 19th century. It has all of the pro forma words that, all of this is only justified if the government of the Solomon Islands lets us come in. But by the government of the Solomon Islands, what they basically mean are their proxies. A very small group of people are pro-Chinese in the Solomon. So, in particular, the Prime Minister, Sogavari. And the deal, among other things, which shows you how 19th century it is, says China would have the right to go in and protect its people and its major projects. And a part of that also, this is very much in the 19th century treaties, is the citizens of the colonial country have a different set of rules for operating in that country than the locals do. So, you would be a Chinese breaking the law in the Solomons, I would expect down the line, if this continues the way it is, wouldn't necessarily be tried in the Solomons. They might be tried back in China, if they're tried at all. So it's a way of saying we are the colonial controllers of your economy, and it's backed up with military might and intelligence and all those other things that go along with it. It's a very, very different type of relationship than you'd see, however imperfect, with some of the other Western or Japanese or Indian partners in the region, for example.
Well, I can see this potentially going really badly. A kind of, the Spanish-American War scenario, or, just kind of anything where there's this disconnect between the people who live there and their ability to have any influence on the most important things that are happening in their country.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very useful to go back to those historical parallels, because the problem is what it's doing to the people, and the answer is giving the people the tools they need to defend themselves. So in the case of the Solomons, the trajectory is very much that Prime Minister Sogavari is not popular. The agreement with China is not popular. And a change of government, if there's an election, free and fair election, he'd very probably lose, in which case a new government would come in that might abrogate the security deal, but also switch recognition back to Taiwan. And there's an election due in 2023. This would be a huge loss of face for Xi Jinping. This is because he would lose a country, and it would give his domestic political competitors, some leverage. So the stakes are actually very high, both for Prime Minister Sogavari, who is quite corrupt, and if he loses an election, there could be investigations into his corruption, and for China, because it affects the credibility of their engagement and their leadership. So in that context, having free and fair elections could be an existential threat to both of them, which means it's actually to their advantage to do something like create a security situation that re-triggers a civil war, and they had a civil war in the past, or creates such a domestic fraught situation that it can justify the deployment of PLA peacekeepers to go in and pacify, for example, the region of Malaita province. And you've interviewed the premier of Malaita, Daniel Soudani. Those people on the ground who are concerned about CCP engagement are terrified. They see this happening, and they know this is the trajectory, that for Sogavare and the CCP, creating a violent domestic situation helps their position. And, killing or arresting opposition leaders and then having those opposition leaders, riot at the injustice of it, helps them. Then they can say the situation is out of control. We need these Chinese peacekeepers. The Chinese sectors are being attacked, and we're going to hold off on the election for a year or two. And in that time, they can, who knows, use political warfare to groom up another section of the population or whatever. So that is a very, as you were describing, Matt, sort of a kind of almost 19th century divide and conquer and then rule type situation. And the antidote to that is democracy, transparency, accountability, rule of law, supporting those mechanisms within the country where the population doesn't get marginalized, where people like Daniel Suidani are helped to spread democracy in their region, which is something he wants to do, educate people about democracy, but also that corruption investigations get started into some of this leadership. So, people around Prime Minister Sogavare have real estate in Australia. You don't have to do the investigation necessarily in the Solomons. You can do disproportionate asset investigations in places like Australia and make the cost of those around Sogavare go up for complicity in this kind of CCP takeover of a key piece of strategic positioning that is greatly detrimental to the people of their country.